everyone. It's Mr. Hefner again. We're going to take a look today at Fables and Parables. I'm coming to you today from inside the beautiful New York Public Library, brought to you by Alaska Airlines. No, they didn't sponsor me or give me money. I just found this great backdrop for Zoom on their site. They have great backdrops from around the world that you can use free, and I thought it might be kind of fun. So let me give them credit. Alaska Airlines provided today's backdrop of the New York Public Library. All right, so as I said, today we're going to take a look at two pieces of folklore, types of folklore. We're going to look at fables and we're going to look at parables. And I like to do these together on the same day because they have an awful lot in common and just a little bit different. So that's going to be our goal. We're going to look at where they have this intersection and where they're different. All right, so let's get started. All right, so our lesson essential question is definitely related to what I've already said. We're going to look at fables and parables, and our goal is to look at how are they both alike and different. And remember, anytime you see this little Cornell Notes icon on a page, that's your hint that something on this page is important enough that it's going to show up on a unit assessment. And the lesson essential question is always going to be one of those things. So let's get started here. If we were in class, if you're watching the video, you're probably doing this independently, but if we were in class, we would get started by brainstorming on our own stories that we can remember from our childhood. And parents tell us stories, grandparents tell us stories, teachers tell us stories, and some of those may stay with us for a long time, to the point where we tell those stories to our own children one day. And then we would partner up and we would share those lists, look to see if we have any of the same stories in common, and then we would have to decide, is it possible that any of these could be fables? Right? Now, if it's a fable, it's probably like 99.9%. It's probably going to have animals as the main characters, and it's going to have symbols in the story, and it's going to teach a moral lesson. Moral lessons mean lessons about right or wrong. And then we'd ask, is it possible that any of these are parables? Now, parables are a good bit more sophisticated. They're almost like fables for grown-ups kind of thing. They still have symbols. They still teach lessons. Most of the time, they're moral lessons, but not always. Sometimes they could just be lessons on how the world works without necessarily, judging moral character. And they also have people as characters, which is something that fables generally don't do. Fables tend to use animals. Parables most likely are going to use people. So they're a little bit more sophisticated. Now, the two genres that we have again. So parables. Parables they're going to be, I almost wish I could take out very there. They're going to be brief stories. They're usually, under a page or two, and they teach a moral lesson about right or wrong. And some of the most famous ones have been used to teach religious ideals. The King James Bible, which is the source of the piece that we're going to read today, was like the first really high quality English translation of the Judeo-Christian Bible. And it's written in poetry. King James, King of England, actually sanctioned it, put together the team of scholars who funded the team of scholars that would work on this. And we're going to look at a really famous one called The Prodigal Son. So we'll be looking at symbols in there. We'll be looking for the lesson it teaches, and then obviously, why is it a parable? Fables are very similar to parables. Again, they're brief stories, and I wish this is where it said very, because fables tend to be shorter than parables. They often have animal characters. Now, that's going to be the biggie right there, the animal characters. Again, they have a moral, a lesson about right or wrong. And some of the most famous fables that you're going to come across are credited to a Greek by the name of Aesop. Aesop taught a lot about right and wrong, good and moral character. He was very much interested in the way society was behaving itself. And ultimately, he fell out of favor with those in power because sometimes when there's corruption, corrupt people don't want the corruption to be recognized, but we'll talk about him later on. Now, the author, we don't have an author for The Prodigal Son here. This comes from the King James Bible, but we do know that the King James Bible was researched, translated, written into poetry, and printed with the authorization of King James I of England. He had previously been King James VI of Scotland, and he was the monarch who came to the throne after the death of Queen Elizabeth. Elizabeth and James were the two monarchs alive during William Shakespeare's time. So if thinking about Shakespeare helps put this in a time perspective, that's the time we're looking at here. All right, and then the prodigal son, we're going to be looking for the definition of parable, what makes a parable, and again, brief story, we're going to be looking for that moral lesson, and we're going to be looking for symbols in there as well. And then, of course, symbol is what I'm talking about here. That's a literary term. A symbol is something that stands for itself and for something else. And it's to help, when you're trying to explain something complex to somebody who's unfamiliar with it, it helps if you can connect it to something that person already knows. And that's where symbols come in. So I can use a symbol, which is something the person already knows, and then take a quality of that symbol to extend to the new concept I'm trying to teach. Hard to explain. You'll see it working as we read the prodigal son today. When we read the prodigal son, or when you read the prodigal son, I want you to look for the characters in the story. Right? I want you to look for a plot. Now, in the prodigal son, you really have three parables in one. So you're going to have a parable that involves some silver coins. You're going to have a parable that involves some sheep. And then you're going to have a parable that involves a father and his two sons. They're all written together as the parable of the prodigal son because all three episodes in there teach the same lesson. But we're going to focus mostly on the last one, the relationship of the father to two of his sons. I want you to be able to explain what the moral lesson is that's being taught. I want you to be able to identify and explain how the symbols work. And then if you're taking your Cornell notes, because again, here it is right down here for Cornell notes, in the cues column of your Cornell notes, it'd be the perfect place to explain some of those connections. All right, the other piece that we'll be taking a look at with this is called the fox and the crow. And again, the fox is a symbol as well as a character, and the crow is a symbol as well as a character. And they each represent a different type of human personality. And that's going to be your job to figure this out. I told you a little bit about Aesop before. He was born around 620 BC, so that's a long time ago. That's over 2,000 years ago. And as I said, he met his death in Delphi while he was working as an ambassador. And the story goes that he was supposed to distribute gold, but he was disgusted at the behavior of the people and their immoral character. And so he refused to do it, and they were so angry, they shoved him off a cliff. What a way to go, right? All right, the literary tools for the fox and the crow. We're looking, again, it's a fable, so we're going to look for the animal characters. We're going to look for the moral lesson. We're still going to look for symbols. And again, we're going to look for types of characters. So you might have those simple characters, which tend to be flat, one dominant trait. And we're going to look for characters that learn lessons and grow and change as the story goes along. And those will be our three-dimensional rounded characters. So in addition to just knowing what character means in this course, I want you to understand the different types of characters and how they can each be used. In the fox and the crow, again, look for the characters. Try to figure out which ones are rounded, which ones are flat. Simple plot, in other words, what happens, what is the moral lesson, and I'll give you a little hint. At the end of this fable, the fox literally says, let me give you a piece of advice. That advice is the lesson, right? Again, look for symbols, and if you're doing these Cornell notes, because here it is again, make sure you identify the connections in the cues column of your Cornell notes. When you're all finished with both of these, if you're working in class, you'll work with a partner. If you're working at home, if you're making up this lesson, you'll have to do it on your own. But in Schoology, I have given you a shared Google Doc. You can't edit it because everybody would be changing the same one. But what you'll have to do is you'll have to take that, you'll have to copy it into your own drive where you can save it and then share it with me. And what you're going to do is, you've done Venn diagrams before. We've got the fox and the crow, and we've got the prodigal son. In this space right here, you're going to list about 3 features of the fox and the crow that are true for it and make it a fable. Over here, you're going to list, this is a little harder, but you're going to list 1, 2, or 3 features that make it a parable. And then in this space between, I should have more space here for you guys, try to come up with 1, 2, or 3 commonalities. How are fables and parables alike? So again, this and this, areas 1 and 2, Those are differences. Area 3 is looking for things that are the same. And I'm going to get out of there. All right, and that's it for The Fox and the Crow, which is going to be a fable, and The Parable of the Prodigal Son, which is a parable. It's right in the title, so it's easy to remember that. Make sure you read them, finish the Venn diagram, and turn that into me, and I'll see you next time.